My name is Nate Kleinman. I am from Philadelphia. I farm in southern New Jersey, and I'm co-founder of the Experimental Farm Network and a founding member of the Ujamaa Cooperative Farming Alliance as well, which is based in Maryland. Experimental Farm Network, we started about uh, 10 years ago now. The purpose being to get people collaborating together on sustainable ag research and especially plant breeding, and in particular, plant breeding towards the development of new perennial staple crops, things like perennial grains, oil seeds, nut crops, tree crops, etc. Um, yeah, the funny thing about this thing is I can't see the screen on the computer, so I'm gonna sit like this and do it like this. So the topic of discussion today is liberating seeds from seed banks. And I know I was feeling a little punchy when I wrote the description. Um, I'm not against seed banks at all. I'll say that. I think a lot of the ways that they've been, um, the way that the folks who run them have gone about the work over the last 120 years has been messed up. Um, but I think that they are really important for maintaining uh, genetic diversity of of really important crops. I actually think that folks should be sending seeds into these seed banks as well, but they're not really the seeds aren't doing any good just sitting there. And the US government has over 600,000 accessions is the word they use, 600,000 varieties in the seed banks around the country. Um, so we're going to learn a little bit about the seed bank system and the about not just the U.S. government system, but some other ones around the world. I'm going to talk about how you can get seeds out of the USDA system. I'm going to talk about how I got into this work and learned about the government seed collections, and then how I've been using it over the last 10 years or so. Um, but this is just an important slide to begin with. It shows the loss of biodiversity of some major crops over the last 100 years. You can't see, but at the bottom, so at the top it says in 1903, commercial seed houses offered hundreds of varieties, as shown in this sampling of 10 crops. And then 80 years later, in 1983, that's how many varieties were left of those original varieties. How many of those named varieties were found in the National Seed Storage Laboratory in Fort Collins, Colorado, which has the biggest collection, or it did then. So you can see 497 varieties went down to 36. Um, 341 squash varieties went down to 40. So there's been this terrible loss of biodiversity, and it's ongoing. But seed banks are a really important way to save seeds. This is a seed bank in Russia. Um, just keeping seeds in a glass jar is a really good way to keep them preserved for a long, long time, especially for keeping them cool. Better even to keep them frozen, keep them out of the sun. Um, I've got a few websites here for some other countries' seed banks. This is the big seed bank in Germany is called Gottersleben, and people in the U.S. are able to get seeds out of this. It's a little bit of a involved um, process, but it's possible. Uh, ICARDA is the International Consortium for Research into Crops from the Dry Areas, DA. So that's arid land crops. CIAT is the bean collection that's based in Colombia, has the largest collection of beans in the world. Of course, Seed Savers Exchange is a seed bank as well. That's a nonprofit based in Iowa. They maintain tens of thousands of seeds in their seed bank. And the first story I'm gonna tell is about this squash. I have a few examples in a bin in the back of the room, which you can look at after. But this is actually This is actually one variety of squash. This is the Nanticoke Maxima squash. It is the Nanticoke people still live today in southern Delaware and the eastern shore of Maryland and southern New Jersey, along the Delaware Bay and the Chesapeake Bays. Um, they sided with the British during the Revolutionary War, and so things didn't work out so well for them. A lot of the Nanticoke people went into hiding. The communities have only sort of come out of hiding in the last 50 years or so. And but over that time, they lost this heirloom crop, and it was still circulating around with the name Nanticoke associated with it. Um, and I found it about 15 years ago in the Seed Savers Exchange vault. I requested some seeds from them, probably sent them $3 for a small sample of seeds. When I asked them for more information, they told me they got it from the Abundant Life Foundation, which was formerly based in the Pacific Northwest in Washington, and their records were lost in a big barn fire. So we don't know when they got the seed. That's when the trail runs cold. But I spent years growing this squash and I really loved it because you plant seed from one of those pink ones. If you plant 10 seeds, you're going to get 10 different looking plants. And they all have different characters. The red ones tend to rot first. The gray and blue ones tend to last the longest. I've had some last for 18 months before they start even getting a sweet spot. They're really delicious. Some of the green ones and maybe the greenish coral ones maybe don't taste as good as the others, but the pink ones, the blue ones, the green ones, the wartier, the better. Germans call the warts on squash Sauerwarts or something, sugar warts, because it's concentration of sugars under the skin and really makes them tasty. Internally, they're just as diverse. So the color of the squash inside will be some of them will be darker, some of them will be paler, small seed cavity, large seed cavity. The seeds, some of them are brown, some of them are white. Um, really, really cool squash. But that diversity was a strength. They weren't interested in the uniform squash. They weren't trying to, market it at a market where everything had to be the same size. They were trying to survive the next winter. And in order to do that, you need something that's going to be able to grow reliably every year. If you have a diverse population like this and some new pest sweeps in, maybe it's going to kill 80% of your plants, but hopefully 20% will survive. And so that diversity is really the key. And that's sort of the main lesson from this whole talk is that we need to maintain this biodiversity. And trusting the government systems to maintain it all is dangerous. They are the seed banks are funded by Congress, and Congress is a blank stirfuck. Clusterfuck. It's the one. Um, so we don't trust that they're going to be able to fund this forever. So we gotta kind of take it into our own hands. Thought you'd like that one, John. Um, Um, I was growing these seeds and I grew them for years. I live half an hour from where the Nanticoke tribal headquarters are in southern New Jersey. And I would go to their powwow every year and try and find somebody who was interested. I talked to the chief, who was a pretty old man, and he was like, he was like, nobody's farming anymore. What do you want me to do with this, basically? And I was like, I'm sure somebody's going to be interested. And eventually, right at the beginning of the pandemic, the woman on the left, Corey Ridgway, emailed me and said she'd found out that Nanticoke squash exists, and she's Nanticoke, and she would like to grow this squash. And I was like, great, I'm a half an hour away. What are you doing tomorrow? So I met them in their backyard, and we sat around the fire. I was wearing a bandana because we thought that prevented against COVID back then. It was like literally the first few weeks of the lockdowns, and they were really excited. I happened to have one nice squash with me that I could gift to them. I gave them a bunch of seeds from other Lenape heirlooms. The Nanticoke and the Lenape sort of merged over the last 200 years in South Jersey. And they were thrilled to get these squash back. Gave me some tobacco seeds in exchange. And happily over the winter, the previous chief retired, and Yuri on the right was elected chief. So now the new chief of the Nanticoke is a huge proponent of farming and is interested in reinvigorating the agricultural heritage of his people. So we're actually working on some other projects together to get access to state-owned land adjacent to wildlife management areas where they can farm at a larger scale, and working with other things. So in the seed world, we call this rematriation when you're giving seeds back. And that's rather than repatriation, we say rematriation to honor the fact that women have been the seed keepers in most traditional farming societies and remain so today. I can tell you from we look at the demographics of who's buying our seeds, and it is about two thirds to one third according to the Facebook data or whatever, um, Shopify data. So in the last couple of years, we also got our hands on the Nanticoke summer squash, which they call maycocks in English. The anglicized name is maycock. The original Lenape word was macaque. And so this particular squash came to a guy named William Woys Weaver, who you might have read some of his books. He's a Pennsylvania-based white Quaker seed keeper and has been a mentor of mine, and serves on our board. So Will was giving a talk in the 80s at a library in South Jersey, and he said they couldn't pay him enough, so he told the organizers to put a call out for anyone who's coming to the talk to bring heirloom seeds with them. And it was a shot in the dark, but quite a few people did. And one of the people who did was a Nanticoke elder named Fanny Johnson, and she brought seeds for this maycock squash. She was already very old then, and told him that she didn't trust anyone was going to be interested in keeping up this squash after she died. So he managed to keep it up for a while. He was down to very few seeds and gave them to us to regenerate. Clearly, you can see this is a landrace. So these are it's a diverse population. These are what they look like when they're full grown. So at this point, they would keep like winter squash, but not taste very good. But when you eat them small, they're delicious summer squash. And what they traditionally would do is harvest them small, spiral cut them, and then hang them to dry. And then the dried summer squash, essentially a dried zucchini, um, would be a staple food throughout the winter. And these are incredibly productive, abundant crops. And so this is another kind of thing that, this is I think I'll have some slides about what a land race is in a little bit, so I'll talk about that term. But it's really um, the diversity that exists in these populations is being lost at a rapid rate. Most people are growing inbred inbred heirlooms or hybrids from commercial seed companies, where you're not really, saving the seed is not going to give you nearly the genetic diversity that exists in a population like this. Um, this is I believe, Swiss uh, seed saving organization called Arkanoa, Noah's Ark. It's a really beautiful organization. The Echo Community, Echo Global Seed Bank is based in Florida, and they're focused on tropical crops. We've gotten some interesting seeds from them, uh, including this Job's Tears on the left. Have any of you ever grown Job's Tears? So a Job's Tears, people think of it as a jewelry crop. It makes these really hard little seeds. And the original rosary beads were Job's Tears. But there are varieties of Job's Tears, and all of these are varieties that have a very thin hull. So it's threshable like any other grain, and you can get this delicious kernel. There's one down there, one down there. Um, that's really nutritious and delicious. But you really can't. It's not easy to crack open those rock hard ones. You need these soft shelled ones. The USDA collection has, I think, two in it, but there are many more out there in the world. Um, so this is the national plant germplasm system as it exists right now. They've closed many stations through the years. There used to be one in Palmer, Alaska, for instance. But these are the ones that are still standing. And of course, they're all kind of on the chopping block every 5 years when they do a new farm bill. Um, and there was rumors going around 4 or 5 years ago that they might be shutting down the coffee and cacao germplasm repository in Miami. And it's like, people don't know about it, but if they did, they would revolt if they heard that we were, threatening coffee and chocolate for the future. But each of these stations maintains different things. In Corvallis, Oregon, they call that the National Clonal Germplasm Repository. They have hops and chestnuts, blueberries, strawberries, all sorts of clonally propagated temperate crops up there. In Ames, Iowa, they have a lot of grains. Same down in Griffin, Georgia, they have a lot of southeastern crops. Geneva, New York has the grapes, the cherries, the apples. Um, it's a big mix. Mayaguez, Puerto Rico has a lot of tropical crops, as you would expect, and same in Hawaii and Hilo. Um, and this is the website. If you go to the National Plant Germplasm System, um, and you want to look at plants, this is where you start. And we're gonna do some walking through of some of these. Um, when you click plant germplasm, it takes you to this page, and you just start by doing a simple search. Um, I first learned about this page when I had sent away to a Seed Savers Exchange member asking for some seeds of a Lenape heirloom. I was living in Philadelphia at the time where I grew up, and I was very interested to know what heirloom seeds from this area, the Delaware Valley, were still in existence. And I found this Sesopsing corn, also called Oklahoma Delaware blue corn. And actually, Chris Hubbard has a bit of this corn downstairs right now. Um, it's a black flour corn. You can eat it like a sweet corn when it's small. It's a pretty short statured plant, and it does some tillering, so it kind of branches from the base. And that Sesopsing is it's again it was one of these aliens from the Lenape people from the Delaware Valley, but it was pretty much lost to the people who stayed. This traveled to Oklahoma, which is why they call it Oklahoma Delaware blue. And Delaware is another name for Lenape people. Um, and then the guy ultimately sent me his seeds, and then he said he sent me seeds for a different corn. He said he was out of the one I wanted, but that I could probably get it from the USDA, and I should check their website. So I did. I searched for this corn. I found all this information about it, received in 1985. Says the blue flower corn, originally brought to Indian Territory by the family of Sarah Wilson Thompson, a full-blooded Lenape who lived on the Delaware Reserve. Her family migrated from their original homeland along the East Coast in what is now New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, and northern Delaware. This succession can therefore be associated with the Lenape or Delaware Indian tribe. And it came from a Charlie Dean is the cooperator there. Charlie Dean, it has his address in Dewey, Oklahoma, and he donated 2 seeds to the USDA. That blue corn, this is the Sesopsing, and then he also donated Puwem, this white corn. I don't know who laid out all these seeds for this photograph, but I really appreciate the work. Um, Puwem is a white flower corn. It'll grow 12, 15 feet tall. I grew it once, and I had one plant had 7 ears on one plant. It was absolutely amazing. Um, and it was, growing in New Jersey, back in the soil where it was supposed to be growing. Um, I looked up some other things that time in the beginning. I looked up the name of the suburb where it was sitting, Jenkintown, and I found a pear called the Taysom pear that was found in a hedgerow in Jenkintown in 1794, and who knew that such a pear existed? It's a delicious little sugar pear, um, and it became popular in the 1800s. Didn't really stand the test of time because it doesn't travel well. Um, but there's a huge narrative on this one. I won't read you all of that, but you can go online and read it yourself. Um, this is a random picture of some corn that I was planting in a couple of rows there. Sorghum is one of my favorite crops. We're going to talk about that next. This is a variety. Also, in those early days when I was just typing in random things in the government system to see what was there, I had been doing work, activist work with a man named Simon Deng from South Sudan, and he was from a town I knew called Malakal, and I thought, okay, what if I type Malakal in? And sure enough, there were 9 sorghums from this town, from this random town in South Sudan. And Simon was very pleased when I brought some to him, although that crop was decimated by fall armyworms. So he was actually laughing at my being a bad farmer in this photo. But he was still tickled to get these sorghums from his town. Um, Now, on the government website, it used to say they've changed the language, but it used to say distributions to fulfill requests for repatriation of subsamples of germplasm collections to a country or community of origin, especially following natural or man-made catastrophes, are considered a high priority. And that was pretty new. That language existed there for about a year. But that was some of the work that we started doing 10 years ago when we started getting these seeds out. We realized that it was a privilege to have access to these seeds, and that it was something that really had to share. So this is another sorghum. It's from Darfur, Western Sudan. Um, Sorghum is a gluten-free grain. It's super easy to grow. It takes 1/6 of the water of corn. It can grow on highly degraded land. It doesn't need any fertilizer. It's an amazing crop. You can pop the kernels like popcorn. You can boil them like rice or barley. You can eat them raw. You can eat them cooked. You can ferment them. You can uh, press the stalks, and you can harvest the seeds when they're still green and steam them and put some butter and salt on, and it's like a chewy sweet corn that's out of this world. In India, they call that ponk. Sorghum has spread around the world, and it's grown on every continent except Antarctica, um, and is uh, and is the fourth most widely grown grain in this country, although mostly we grow it for animal feed. That is starting to change. It's showing up in processed foods. If you go to the market and buy gluten-free ginger snaps, they're probably made from sorghum and they're probably delicious. You probably wouldn't even be able to tell that they're made from wheat. Those stuffed pretzels filled with almond butter. Um, those pretzels are being made from sorghum now, and they're not even advertising that it's gluten free. It's like tiny in the corner because they taste just as good as stuff made from wheat. Um, Sorghum has wild relatives. This is a wild perennial called Johnson grass that you may be familiar with as a really nasty weed. But people have crossed grain sorghum and Johnson grass to develop experimental perennial sorghum. And we're really interested in working with that. The USDA has some of this germplasm in there. Germplasm, by the way, just means anything that can be used to propagate a new plant. So germplasm is seed, it's a tuber, it's a root, it's a bulb, it's a cyanwood, it's a tissue cultured little bit of cells. That's what germplasm means. So that's why they don't call it the National Seed Collection. They call it the National Germplasm Collection. And the USDA will distribute for free to anyone who requests it with a legitimate research, breeding, or educational purpose. They'll distribute all of that stuff. Over the years, I've gotten thousands of things sent to me from the USDA. So I started getting things from I realized I did a little looking. I studied foreign policy in college, and I'm interested in international affairs and diplomacy. So I started looking at the names of places in the world that were sort of flashpoint places, and I thought, I wonder what we have in our collection here. And it turns out that in the 1940s, U.S. scientists were wandering through markets in Kandahar, Afghanistan, where you're not liable to see a lot of Americans walking around these days. That was the birthplace of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Um, and yet it was an agricultural hot spot in southern Afghanistan. And this beautiful eggplant, really short season, um, really early, easy to grow, beautiful pale skinned green eggplant comes from there. They call it sesame eggplant. This is the largest leafed garden cress I've ever seen. Comes from that same place in Kandahar. It grows really big, and I think it's an oil seed variety. Garden cress oil has medicinal uses and culinary uses. This is an okra from Afghanistan, from Kandahar. You can see the diversity in this population. So again, this is a land race. I believe this is where the slide is exactly. So land race is a dynamic population of a cultivated plant. It has historical origin, distinct identity, and lacks formal crop improvement, as well as often being genetically diverse, locally adapted, and associated with traditional farming systems. That's sort of a academic definition, but basically we're talking about a population of plants that hasn't been subjected to traditional plant breeding. It's what farmers grow and save year to year. They're saving their best seeds, so there is selection happening, but they're also sharing it with their neighbors. And maybe they're buying from a farm store one year and adding an infusion to their population. But if you go from one valley to the next, the farmers in one are probably growing something that on the whole looks a little different from the valley to next valley over. And the next valley over, it's even farther away. Um, and these reservoirs of genetic diversity are the basis of all modern crops, essentially. Anything you buy from a seed company now, if you trace it back far enough, at some point it was a land race that some traditional farmers somewhere in the world were growing. Um, this is some landrace wheat from Turkey, collected in 2012. These are some landrace corns from Mexico and South America. Um, so much diversity among corn in particular. This is a landrace okra from Iraq. I've been involved with this Iraqi seed collective project. Annabelle's not here. No, next talk. But this is a beautiful okra, and Iraqi people, when they see this, most people who grow okra, you see this and you think this doesn't look like the okra that I'm used to. It's not, the sort of narrow, darker green, Clemson spineless type okra that you see in the supermarket. But people in Iraq see that, and that's their okra. When they want to make their traditional lamb okra stew, they want that okra in it. Um, and so somebody's got to save those seeds and keep those available. This is one that's been in the USDA collection since it was collected in 1948. It's an eggplant collected in a market in Baghdad. Also a landrace, the same lot of seeds produce both of these eggplant. So there's some evident genetic diversity there. This is a stuffing eggplant, also would have been stuffed with lamb or maybe lentils and rice, but really delicious. They call that makdus, that type of eggplant. This is a watermelon from Syria, from Homs, which was one of the places where the Syrian Revolution began, um, and the city was consequently leveled by the war. Um, the watermelons in that part of the world are not always sweet, and they're not typically grown as a dessert. They're grown as a vegetable. Watermelons are grilled and served with meat, served with feta cheese and mint, maybe put into a salad. So this is a very, it's not necessarily going to be a sweet fruit, but again, when we've grown this one, it's shown a lot of variability, but almost all of the seeds look the same, and that's sort of one way you know that you have what you're looking for there. This is another Syrian land race that we got from the USDA. It's a hot pepper called Phascorea. This is a Pome's tomato, and once we started making some of these seeds available, someone reached out to me who worked with Syrian refugees in Lebanon, and this is a refugee camp in the Bekaa Valley, and they're growing the tomato there. They actually were growing some South Sudanese sorghum that I sent as well, because I thought that would be just a good source of nutrition that would grow well in that area, and they were happy to grow it. But I was told that, in particular, folks from Homes were so happy to have that tomato because they thought it was lost. They had left homes as refugees. They didn't have seeds for that tomato, and to see it again was incredibly moving for them. Um, so when I and some of you may be familiar with Vivian Sansour, who's the founder of the Palestine Heirloom Seed Library and a dear friend of mine. She started the Heirloom Seed Library the same year we started EFN in 2014. We've been working closely together for about 5 years now, and she's she's done unbelievable work trying to save these seeds against all odds. And of course, it's more important now than ever to be maintaining all of these Palestinian seeds. She's got in her hands there, I think, watermelon seeds, um, gourd gourd seeds, parsley, fenugreek, chard, spinach, eggplant, so many beautiful, beautiful crops. The Palestine was one of the places where agriculture was born. So many of the most important foods around the world come from there. And and yet even before this latest horror show, there it's been harder and harder for Palestinian farmers to keep these things alive. They have they have less and less access to their land every year as it's taken away. Settlements are expanded. Palestinians kicked off their land by force, and and so, she told me that just a year and a half ago, someone drove up with a trunk full of seeds and said, I can't grow these anymore. You have to take them. Um, and that's happening all over. Palestine is one of the most dramatic, vivid examples of it, but it's happening around the world. Um, Now, since I've been working with Vivian, we've started looking through the USDA collection, and we found stuff as old that's been in there for 120 years, including a durum wheat from Gaza. We found multiple herbs, cumin, coriander, fenugreek, aniseed from Palestine and they tell you the name of the farmer that it was collected from, in many cases, many decades ago. We have in our catalog a coriander from a particular farmer on the Araba Plain in northern Palestine near Jenin. Um, and So getting those things out, they're not doing any good just sitting in the seed banks, but they mean so much to people when you get them out and put them back into their hands. And so that's part of the reason why I'm doing this talk and why I've done it in as many places as I can is because, again, over 600,000 things in the catalog. We need a lot of people to be doing this work, getting the seeds out, getting them back to people, um, and just teaching people that these seeds are available. This is a tomato we just grew last year. A friend of mine grew it in Jersey, but it's in our catalog this year. It's called Bukovinsky, and it's from southwestern Ukraine, from the small portion of Ukraine that's in the Carpathian Mountains. You got a question? You have to grow it. They don't actually ask for any follow-up. It would be nice. They say it would be nice if you follow up with us, but they don't require it. And they say for research, education, or breeding purposes. So once they send you the seeds, I mean, their job and the scientists who run these things, they want to get the seeds out there. They're not just spinning their wheels, growing these things, maintaining them. They're growing them out. They're growing out, thousands every year, putting the rest in storage. They stay in freezers for 2 decades maybe. Then they grow them out again to save more seeds. So they want these seeds to get out there. So usually they send you such small amounts. The way we do it is almost invariably we will grow them first so that we can increase the seeds. If they send me 50 sorghum seeds, I'm not going to split that up into 5 packets of 10 seeds each because that's a recipe for losing it and losing the genetic diversity that's there to begin with. I'm going to grow out 25 of them myself and then have, you know, thousands and thousands of seeds that I can share with more people. Yeah, this is one lovely tomato from Ukraine. Um, this is the Maldives in the Indian Ocean. Down at the bottom, that large atoll there. This is called Huvadu Atoll, and I believe right here is this island called Conde Island. This is a close-up of it. It's about less than a half a mile wide, and less than a mile and a half long. It has 4 roads on the entire island, and slightly less than 300 people live there. Um, it also is home to some really important ruins, some from the Buddhist era in the Maldives. There's some ruins from ancient Hindu temples that were there. There was these sea monster heads made in stone, and Thor Heyerdahl did an expedition there. It's a famous picture in one of his books, somebody carrying one of those. And in the USDA collection, we found a Tulsi basil from that island. Um, it's really delicious. The Some of the fruitiest and most amazing aromas I've ever smelled on a Tulsi. We grew that out, and and we save the seeds. Um, Another atoll, this Lone Atoll, the southern part of the main chunk of the Maldives. There's another small island um, right down here. It's called Itadu. And from that island came this really interesting melon. This is botanically the same as a cantaloupe, but obviously an incredibly different beast. I'm not sure what it was for, what it was bred for. Possibly it was used like a cucumber when it was small. The pulp around the seeds, it was obviously seems like they were breeding for that pulp. It's kind of sour. It's not sweet. Maybe they were making alcohol from it. Maybe they were feeding it to pigs. I don't know. We've got some work to do to find out, but um, in the meantime, we found this in there. We're growing it out and saving it. The Maldives are coral atolls in the Indian Ocean. They're liable to be underwater in 50 to 100 years. Maldives is going to be one of the first countries to disappear in the face of climate change. The government has already been in talks with Indian government, Sri Lankan government, Australian government about buying large tracts of land to move their entire population there in the future. And so preserving the agricultural heritage of these places is also incredibly important because nobody, in the when we talk about seed preservation, we talk about in situ and ex situ. In situ is in place, ex situ is out of place. And there will be no in situ preservation of these crops in 50 or 100 years. So if they're going to still exist, it's going to take seed banks, it's going to take community seed saving, to maintain these things. Sometimes we find some mysteries in the government collection. This is a tepary bean, which is a species of bean different from the common bean. It was domesticated in what's now the U.S. Southwest and northern Mexico. Many of the ones in the government collection are associated with a particular indigenous people there. This one was not. Um, it had a number associated with it. I don't know if it came out of a breeding program. I don't know if it just, was in an envelope that got misplaced and nobody knew where it was from, but they kept it because it was a cool bean. And it is a very cool bean. But despite being from the Southwest, it grew very well for me in Princeton, New Jersey. I had a plot that I grow with some students there. And Hickory beans are amazing because they need hardly any water to grow. Some hickory beans can mature from one irrigation. You plant the bean, you water it, and it will ripen for you. That's how adapted it is to the incredibly arid desert Southwest. Um, they also are some of the only beans in the world, and the only beans in the Phaseolus genus that will ripen when you have a hot night. And as with climate change, we're getting more and more hot nights. So I mentioned that Seat in Colombia that has tens of thousands of beans. If we get to the point where our nighttime temperatures are too hot, we won't be able to grow almost any of those beans anymore. So the genetics that exist in tepary beans are incredibly important in that respect. They can be crossed with common beans. They're now actually doing research in Puerto Rico to work with tepary beans and common beans to develop ones that are adapted to places other than the desert Southwest. But I really love this one. I'm excited to try and find out if we can figure out where it came from. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this is one that's associated with a particular indigenous group. I've seen ones that are similar but have more white than black. This one has a little bit more black than white. Um, so little mystery there. Another country that we've sort of have targeted through the years is one that originally became interested in because I have some ancestry from there. My grandmother was probably born along the border here between Moldova and Romania along the Prut River. Um, Left when she was two to come to the U.S. And Moldova was then part of the Soviet Union. Now it's an independent country. It's widely known and considered as the poorest country in Europe. There's been massive rural depopulation there as people leave for the city, for the capital of Moldova, or for other cities in Europe. You can see it as also sandwiched between Ukraine and Romania. So the European Union is the border there now, and it's a place that is yeah, fearful of Russian invasion, to say the least. So the agricultural heritage of that place has been massively disrupted, and it's another place that's really important to save seed from. This is a squash that comes from Moldova. It has a very, very, very thin skin around the seed. So there are some holeless seeded pumpkins out there, naked seeded pumpkins. We sell one in our catalog. But this is one that's sort of an intermediate one, and who knows what those genes are important for. But it's important to maintain it. We know that. This is a Moldovan green tomato. That's one of my favorite tomatoes of all time. It ripens green. It's one of these green when ripe tomatoes, and but it's not like the green zebra that's pretty small. This is a nice beefsteak slicing tomato. Um, so in the last couple of years, I started getting a lot more interested in. I realized that I had been getting seeds out from other people's cultures for a long time, but I learned more about my own family history, and I started deep diving and trying to figure out if they have anything from some of the particular towns that I know where my ancestors came from. And one of the places where I know the most about my ancestors is Odessa, Ukraine, on the Black Sea. And when I typed Odessa in, I realized that there's multiple spellings of Odessa. The Ukrainian way is one S, the Russian way has two S's. So when I started doing two different spellings, and then I realized that some of the things are just named Odessai, like from Odessa in Russian, but then nobody recorded that it was probably a variety from Odessa. So I started typing all this in, and I realized that there were a whole bunch of things in the US government collection from the place where my ancestors come from. So one of the first ones I found was this beautiful landrace calendula. And I grew that out and just was really staggered by the diversity there. Um, and it was so moving to go out there and see this and imagine that, okay, some of my ancestors may have used this plant, may have smelled the flowers walking down the street. Um, and it got me thinking more and more about my own family history. So I started doing a little bit more research, and I found an email that I had started and had not finished from 3 years earlier to a third cousin who I'd been connected to by another cousin who did all this family research. And I started making this long post to tell him what my branch of the family had been up to for the last century. And I never finished it because I am sort of the family history keeper in my family, and I said I'll come back to this, and I never did. So I finally finished that email, sent it off to this third cousin I've never met, and within 4 hours, he sent me an equally long email with all this other information that he had learned in the intervening years, and within a few weeks after that, he had been inspired to do more work, and I all of a sudden had some really mind blowing. Um, Revelations about my family history. Um, One thing before I get to that, I'll show you this. This is that landrace that I grew last year, same one. You can see the second to last plant has these really beefy leaves, much bigger than all the others, far fewer flowers than all the others. Um, and I realized that from reading, I've read that calendula is a pot herb also. We think of it as just a medicinal herb, but people eat it as a vegetable and have traditionally. But the leaves are kind of fiddly on the ones that we have. But then when I saw this, I was like, oh shoot, this is like a lettuce calendula. This is a big, leafy, beefy calendula. So I'm gonna over the next few years, I hope to select like a leafy vegetable calendula type from this population, and I don't know what it's going to taste like. We'll see, but I think you throw it in some boiling water, it'll probably be tasty. Um, but I also found this Nigella black seed from Odessa. Super fragrant. Black seed is being sold like for $20 for a small bag, or $40 for a little thing of the oil, because it's incredibly medicinal for a wide range of applications. I had no idea it was even grown in Odessa, but it was collected here at a market in the 80s by a woman from Eugene, Oregon, who brought a handful of things back and got them into the USDA collection, thankfully, because now I'm able to grow them. And both of these we grew enough to have them in our catalog this year, along with this one, which is a really beautiful melon from Odessa as well. But yeah, doing this family history research, I learned about my great grandmother, who I knew that my mother used to tell this story where her grandmother, who lived in her house when she was growing up, and spoke Russian as her first language, she would recount all of her siblings. She was one of 10, and she would say there was Golda and Leila and Perla and Salman, and she would forget the names because it had been a long time. And my mother would tell the story as in kind of a joking way. Um, and she only one of her siblings lived around Buffalo, had also come to Buffalo with her where my mom grew up. So this great grandmother of mine had a sister who was there. We're still close with some of her descendants, my second cousins, third cousins. Um, but then the rest of the siblings she had lost touch with, and we didn't really know what happened to them. But then this third cousin comes at me with all of their names. He tells me what happened to all of them. Six of them, it turns out, made it to the United States. Only two lived in Buffalo. The rest lived in other places. Salman went to Azerbaijan and ultimately died in the Gulag in the 1970s as an old man. Um, and two of her sisters, as it turns out, were murdered by the Nazis. And he sent me a picture of them. Um, I believe that's Leia with her family, second from the right, seated up there, and Perla, bottom right, with her family there. And as far as I know, all of these people were killed in the war. They were in a town called Bober in Belarus, and there was a massacre. 900 some people were killed. It's one of the few places in Belarus where there's actually a monument. Um, and I would have learned none of this without these magical plants. I really think the plants, led me in this direction. And it made much more personal for me that the work with seeds is so important. Um, these are not just inanimate objects. These are living beings with a real, deep personal connection to people's lived histories. Um, so that's a little bit about the past. But now we're going to talk a little bit about the future. And one of the plants, if you know anything about Experimental Farm Network, you know that we're excited about perennials. And this is some perennial wheat. This is the plot outside of Princeton. On the left, you can see behind that orange flag are a bunch of these perennial wheat plants going to flower. And in my hand is some of this perennial wheat. This is not Kunze, like the Land Institute has developed, which is intermediate wheatgrass. It's very little. It's basically a domesticated version of a wild grass perennial that's related to wheat, but is not wheat. But this is wheat that has been crossed with some of those perennial relatives to maintain that perenniality so that it can flower, go to seed, and then return to a juvenile state and survive another winter and come back again the next year. So we're really excited about this. The USDA has some perennial wheats in this system. They have some perennial rye in there. Um, and when we're talking about climate change and changing our agricultural system for climate change, perennials are going to be a really important part of that because perennials take carbon from the atmosphere and they put it in the ground. And when you don't till the ground, you're maintaining the soil microbe life. And that's what gives soil its capacity to capture carbon. Um, these things produce really long root systems, so they also prevent erosion. They also keep water from being polluted. So in the long run, we need a way to take, the millions of acres that we have in genetically modified corn and soy and create something more sustainable, grow more sustainable crops. Perennial grains are probably a long ways off from being a major part of our agricultural system, but if we're not doing the work, if we're not saving the germplasm, we're never going to get there. We also need people to be growing things that are already ready, like chestnuts and hazelnuts that could be replacing corn and soy respectively already. But we need government action to subsidize that instead of subsidizing industrial, annual tillage farming. We can do it. It's going to take a concerted, society-wide effort. Um, so there's a few other clips that I just put in here because I think they're really cool, and I didn't really know anything about them until I found them in the government collection. These are both called Tartary buckwheat. The one on the left is a little more of a typical type Tartary buckwheat, and then the one on the right is a bit of a looser skinned one. You can't really tell probably, but the seeds are starting to split open and reveal the kernel inside. Tartary buckwheat is a wild relative of buckwheat. It has more antioxidants. It's more rich in nutrients, and um, and it grows in more marginal areas. So it's a really interesting crop. I requested the entire government collection one year. That was 78 accessions of Tartary buckwheat, and did a side-by-side trial of all of them to see which ones grew well, which ones were, outliers or interesting in some way. And that's how we identified quite a few that we've grown more of. We've offered them in the catalog in the past. I'm sure we'll go back to Tartary buckwheat again soon. You can eat the sprouts and the new leaves as well as a vegetable or in a salad. Also really rich in rutin, this important antioxidant. Um, these are some mung beans from Madagascar that we just put in the catalog this year. It's hard to tell from this picture, but it's like mottled blue over green. Question.
So, well, his first question, the seeds in the catalog, are they all um, diverse in the sense that if we grow the sampling of the seeds, they won't all be identical?
That's not true of all the things we sell, but quite a few are like that, yeah. So we sell seeds for different land races. We sell seeds for intentional breeding mixes where people have brought together a wide amount of diversity in order to breed new things. And so we sell those diverse breeding populations, and people can breed something locally adapted from those populations for their own area.
Mhm. Um, they're mainly organized by like specific stones, but I'm sure have a spectrum of breeding issues. Um, yeah, like what is your thought? What are your thoughts on that and like how to get out of that paradigm? How to look for that, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think that um, a lot of the old heirloom varieties are deeply inbred. They're not super resilient, but they may have value. They may have a really important traits as well. And I think it's important to save all of these things. So I think there's a place for maintaining old heirloom varieties as well. Um, but I'm also, really, I love the folks who are bringing 80 varieties, heirloom varieties together to all breed with each other and then have something completely new that can spawn something that will help us survive what's coming. Because any of you who are growing, you know that the weather's getting wackier and wackier every year. I mean, just look outside today. This is not normal. I'm not from here, but I know this is not exactly normal for mid-January in Massachusetts. And it's only going to get worse, and it's happening faster and faster. So we really, this has become an urgent imperative that we not only maintain these things, but we expand biodiversity as well. We need to be adapting. This a seed sitting in a freezer is not going to be adapting to this new world we live in. Um, and so I do think there's a place for all of it. But you're going to see more and more seed companies are going to be starting to sell diverse mixes. I feel pretty confident about that because the proof is in the pudding. I mean, if people keep coming back to our seed company because they want those experimental things. They like um, they there's something fun about planting a seed and not knowing what you're going to get. But it's also really valuable. The lesson from that Nanticoke squash, the importance of that diversity. Um, and that Nanticoke squash, again, I was just telling somebody earlier, it's one of the only Maxima squash that I know that can fight off the vine borer. Vine borer is a terrible pest on Maxima squash, on a lot of different squash. And it will it will really that squash, the vine, because it's from that area where we've had the vine borer for a long, long time, the vine borer will lay its egg, the grub will move through the vine. It won't kill the plant. It'll get all the way to the developing fruit, and then it goes into the fruit. Maybe it can make it an inch, but the fruit gets too hard for it. It can't eat its way through it, and then it'll just die there, or you can find it and stick a needle in it, but the squash will heal over that wound from the bug and just keep on growing. And that's not true of all of them. I've seen it kill a few of them, but that kind of resilience doesn't exist in those inbred hybrids and in those inbred varieties. They're all pretty much the same. And so if one of them is susceptible, they're all going to be susceptible. With the Nanticoke, you have that diversity, and so I think it's really important, and I do think that there's a paradigm shift coming, especially for small scale seed companies that are mostly aiming at gardeners and small farmers. I think the big commercial folks are still going to be focused on you know hybrids that are predictable, that are being grown for high input, high fertilizer chemical production. Um, but I think for the small scale stuff, people are going to be saving more and more of their own seeds. Um, this is a relative of sea kale. Any of you ever grow sea kale? The sea kale is a perennial brassica. This is a plant called Tartar bread plant in the same genus. Comes from Central Asia, Caucasus Mountains area, and this is from just one season of growth. It makes this massive root. It's a perennial. The root would have been traditionally powdered and dried and powdered and mixed with wheat 50-50 to make bread. But this was a lot easier to grow than the wheat and easier to process in some ways. So it was a really good and nutritious adjunct. You can also eat the leaves. The USDA has a couple of these in the system, but there's so much more diversity out there. And that's one other thing I wanted to mention, that they still have these prop germplasm committees, and the USDA still funds people to go around the world and collect more germplasm. I think that there's really important ways to change the way we do that when we're out there in the world, to do it in a way that is not purely extractive, but is reciprocal, where you're actually creating a relationship with the people you get the seeds from, where you're compensating them for the seeds, where you're maintaining that relationship over time and paying them royalties for the seed that you've gotten, and that you're growing from them, and making sure that everybody's going, this exchange is happening in a just way and not in an extractive way, as was the paradigm for the last 100 years, where scientists would go out there, grab all the seeds they could get as much information as they could, have no more contact with the people they got the seeds from, never send them a check or anything, or even a thank you letter. Um, the USDA has a ton of asparagus from around the world. I shifted here to talk a little bit about perennials. Goes well beyond perennial grains, but we could be eating way many more perennial vegetables, perennial oil seeds. This is a tropical perennial called Conavalia that a lot of folks who are, agroecologists in the global south know about this plant because it's a great nitrogen fixer. It's got these huge edible beans that you don't eat the skin, you just eat the pod. They also call this sword bean. They're just massive. But I could grow them in New Jersey too. They don't just need, they're not a perennial there, but you can grow them for seed there. Um, Government has wild strawberries. This is one that was collected by a rest stop in Maine, but it has been tested. It has been tested, and juice from this plant, from this strawberry fruit, can kill lung cancer cells in vitro. There's so many medicinal applications of plants that we don't even think about, and unless we're preserving as much diversity as we can, we may lose these things. Um, we do send some, and I'm in correspondence with some of the research scientists, but it's been much more of a one-way thing. I've been getting things from them, but I plan to send a lot more to them in the next few years. Um, this is a currant. They'll send you cuttings of currants, gooseberries, grapes, apples, cherries, whatever. Um, and there's a few things that are maintained in the government system, but they're not available on the website. And this is one of them. This is Apios americana, or ground nuts, or hopness is the old Lenape name. And this is a legume. This is a perennial legume. You eat the tuber. You can also eat the beans. And this is the beautiful flower up close. These are the beans. This is growing right by my house in South Jersey around a little lake. Um, and last year we harvested so much that we were able to put the seeds in the catalog. This was a really, really important staple crop for indigenous people across Eastern North America. There's lots of accounts from the early colonists about eating these ground nuts and that it was, much very good as good as potato or turnip or something. And with butter and salt, it's fantastic. Like it's a really delicious food. It's a multi-use crop. You can get the protein-rich tubers. You can eat the beans as well. Um, and there are people who are doing some breeding work with this. The USDA's collection is maintained by Steve Cannon at Iowa State University in Ames. They have not made that available through the website, but it is available if you reach out to Dr. Cannon. He will get you some of these things. Uh, it's aggressive, but it's native, so it can't be invasive. The ones that are grown like New York and North are triploid, and they don't produce seed. The ones from about New Jersey South are diploid, and they will produce seed. So what's interesting about that is that the ones that are found in New England and in Quebec and in the maritime states, the maritime provinces, those were brought there as tubers. They must have been brought there as tubers. So the ones that are creeping around ponds and streams are remnants of agricultural landscapes that are from indigenous people planting those to eat them. But it won't take over unless you have a really wet area that they really like wet ground. Pretty low. I mean, the USDA, when you go through there, they will tell you if something can't be sent to a certain state, if it is illegal or a noxious weed. Um, where I've been farming for the last 10 years is between two hayfields, so it's harder for things to spread into the natural environment. And if we grow anything that we have any inkling that it might go invasive, we're very careful to make sure we cover it and collect all the seed. And um, so far, I haven't noticed anything naturalizing that would become a problem plant. But I'm a little bit less concerned about it with a lot of these plants, it largely because the landscapes around me all over are already so degraded and so far from the, from the original ecosystems that were here because of the invasive plants that are already here. So yeah, it could. There's the possibility certainly that it could be that things could get worse, but um, I'm not too worried about it. And I think the risk and reward, we have such a broken agricultural system. I think it's really important that we're doing this work to fix our agricultural system. And I think that I think the potential rewards outweigh the potential risks, in my opinion.
Yeah, I have a question on the question. I'm a friend who giving me some seeds from an indigenous woman, and the interest is to try to keep them going and to propagate them further and
Yeah.
helping to grow with different help, seeds in the lawn. What's the standard for growing them out? They don't, intermix with other things I'm growing in order to do this.
And
Would be helpful.
every seed has its own requirements for seed saving. Seed Savers Exchange has some good information online. There's a great one pager from a group called Seed Matters that doesn't exist, but you can still find this one pager that just tells you the isolation distance for each crop. That's really what you need to know. Um, how far does it have to be from another variety to not cross? And also, how large a population do you need to prevent inbreeding depression? So, if you want at least 20 okra plants and you want those okra plants at least 500 feet from any other okra plant. But every crop has a different rule, so there's no hard and fast rule. Self-pollinating crops can be much closer. Crops that are pollinated by the wind, much, much farther. Insect pollinated crops, intermediate in between there. I'll take one more question now, and then I'm going to finish the talk and then more questions at the end.
Seeds because do I do multiple corporations have seeds like the list on
The vast majority of the people who get the seeds out of the USDA system right now probably are corporations and universities that are being funded by corporations. So it is definitely a problem. And that's one of the reasons why we haven't seeds that we get from particular communities. We have not put those in the government system. We'd like to keep them out of there. But the way the system works right now, uh, it's ridiculous. But government corporations can put a patent on a trait that has existed in a crop for 1,000 years, and they can say, "This is ours. We put a utility patent on it." And if you don't have the money to challenge them, it's very hard to. So it's a really messed up system, and we need some policy changes, and we are working on that as well, and doing some policy work, especially through the Ujamaa Cooperative, which I'm going to talk more about in the next session, which is downstairs at 3:45. Um, but that is a very good, important question. Um, Another crop I wanted to talk about here, the USDA has a couple of, but I've gotten much more from the wild myself, is sea plantain, Plantago maritima. You can see on the left, it's this really fleshy, succulent plantain that lives on the coast. You might be familiar with this plant, it especially likes rocky areas. The Maine coast is covered with it, I'm sure. I think I've seen some growing at Plum Island. It's in Massachusetts as well. And it's a really, really nice food crop, but it's a perennial vegetable, and you can take the leaves off the plant for like 4 or 5 days unrefrigerated, and they're still crunchy and delicious because of that succulence. So this has potential as a perennial garden vegetable, but we need to do a lot of breeding work to get there. Um, with Ujamaa, we're working with this ultra cross okra. This is a population of okra that has 85 different okras. So if you have trouble growing okra in this climate, you plant the ultra cross. You're likely to find ones that'll ripen early. With that diversity comes strength. The ultra cross pollard is a mixture of 21 different heirloom pollard varieties, trying to restore some of that diversity to pollards. That's Bonita Adib on the left and Ira Wallace on the right, with some blooming ultra cross pollards down in North Carolina. We were there last year, and it's a really beautiful project. This is some at the plot in Princeton. This was in January, last winter. It had been cold already, and those covers are just left over from when we were keeping them covered for insects. So these were not protected at all through the winter, but they're still like beautiful, totally edible. You can harvest from them. The purple ones generally looking better than the yellow ones. Um, but I really love that. I just took a few random pictures of what the envelopes look like from the USDA. So this is fava bean from Syria, land rice from the Damascus Bazaar. This is a sunflower from Iran called Aftab Gargan. This is a brassica, unknown species of brassica from Gujarat in India. They call it rye, and it's an oil seed. This is where you go with the website to get to the USDA site. Um, and I put this one. So like if you go, you can search with geographical descriptors, things like that. You can also do a search if you click that second button there, descriptors. You can do a search for different traits in different crops. So you click on maize, and then you can click if you want maize that has high oil for producing corn oil. You can check oil percentage, and then only look for the ones that have the highest oil percentage. Breed them together, develop an oil-rich seed corn variety. You can look at, all sorts of different traits, disease resistance, pest resistances, things like that. If you have problem with European corn borer, you want the ones that are highly resistant. Um, and then the last thing I have here is this soybean. I thought this was really interesting. There's a P34 protein in soybean is the main allergen that makes people allergic to soy. A lot of people are allergic to soy. So I thought, okay, this is in here. I checked that P34. You click, okay, you want low or null for P34. And then equal to low or null for P34. And then out of the 14,400, this is the total number of soybeans that you can see for expressing that protein is over 14,000. 9 of them do not express that protein, and they are all wild soybean relatives. But from that, you could cross them with soybeans, back cross them with other soybeans, and potentially breed a hypoallergenic soybean. But this is the kind of thing that you can do with this system. And they're testing more and more every year. We need them to fund this better. They probably, it's one of the best things the government does. Maybe one of the only really great things the government does. But they need more money to do it. Probably 4, 5, 6 times more money. I've been to some of these research stations and they're like ghost towns. They were built for 10 times more people than they now have the budget to hire to work there. It's really distressing, and especially now because we're essentially outsourcing our food system to these giant corporations who are driven by nothing but profit, um, and it's really effed up. Um, so this particular one comes from Kumamoto, Japan. I grew it. I have a tiny little bit of this one growing that I've got still in Jersey. Um, and then you just click that little shopping cart button and they give you a list, just like Amazon, only it's free. Um, you click the checkout button and then they ask for a little paragraph about what you plan to do with the germplasm, and you just explain what it's for. It is a lot easier if you go at them with a .edu or a .org or a .gov email address. If you have a .com or anything else, they're going to send you an automatic form letter that says, this is not for home use, blah, 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 blah. You have to challenge that form letter and say, no, I'm really using it for this purpose, blah, blah, blah. And they should send you the seeds. But if you go at them with an institutional affiliation, even if it's a BS one that you've made up, they're going to send you the seeds. Um, this is a squash we got from there, and it accidentally crossed with the Nanticoke one year, and we had these beautiful uniform F1 hybrids, and we were like, oh, this is such a beautiful squash. Where'd this come from? But we quickly realized what had happened. It was this Bolivian indigenous squash that was grown on sandbars in the Amazon, and a cross between one of these Nanticoks made these beautiful pink striped squash. That was the F1 year. And then, of course, the F2 year, there's an explosion of diversity, and we got all of these out of it. But it just we thought, okay, maybe we can breed a vine borer resistant squash that's, more suited for the tropics from this one. Um, Still working on that long-term project. And maybe the last thing I have here to show you is that I just think is really was kind of blew my mind when I saw it. Have you heard of jojoba? Like seen it in shampoo or things like that? Jojoba is a native plant to the desert Southwest, to the Sonoran Desert. Um, it is, yeah, native to the U.S. and Mexico, Arizona, California, Baja California, and Sonora. And right there, when you click that economic uses tab at the top of the page, it says potential is petroleum substitute. This is a plant that grows in the desert. It grows better in drought years. It can survive some frost. It takes no inputs and it produces this petroleum substitute. There was a lot of interest in this in the 1970s when we banned whaling because sperm whale oil, head oil, was a really important industrial product, and the liquid ester that comes out of jojoba is chemically very similar. Um, but of course, the oil companies worked their magic with the government. The funding dried up. The USDA's research plots have just been sitting there since the 80s and nobody's been really touching them. But you can still request cuttings from the USDA and get cuttings of jojoba like that and root them yourself and work on it. Not going to do much good up here, but you know, this is that's what the seeds look like. So, you know, these are the kinds of things that are out there if you just know to look for them. And all these wild relatives as well. These are wild relatives that are assessed as an urgent need of further collecting to improve their representation in gene banks. A wild relative of beet, a wild Galapagos tomato, some wild watermelon relatives. Um, and the last one here is a calendula wild relative from Western Sicily. It exists in just a couple places in Western Sicily. This beautiful, like really smelly, pungent medicinal thing. So yeah, questions. Well, clearly, I focus on a lot of different things. I have some ADD, and some struggles choosing what to focus on. But kind of they choose me. Like the ones that I, when we started this, we probably the first year we were growing in South Jersey, Dusty and I, we planted like 800 different things. And this year, like last year, maybe I planted 50 things. I've come down to earth a little bit. You realize you have to focus on things. So I focus what speaks to me, what feels the most urgent. And right now, I'm really interested in those sea plantains. I'm interested in the Apios. I'm really interested in the perennial wheat. I'm growing these ancestral things that are ancestral to me. I'm working with this Iraqi seed collective, the Palestine Heirloom Seed Library, working with some indigenous peoples in New Jersey. So I'm doing a lot of their cultural rematriation work. And honestly, that it feels important to me in my bones, but it's also practically important for the basic reasons of preservation. If you have an ancestral connection to something, you're going to do a better job of preserving it than if it's just some random crop that you have no personal connection to. So I really do believe that encouraging people to save the things that are theirs has value beyond the intrinsic value of that act.